History has seen many great warriors. Some conquered lands. Some built enormous empires. But very few changed the way wars were fought forever. More than 200 years ago, in the heart of southern Africa, a child was born who was not expected to become anything. He was rejected. He was mocked. He was treated as an outsider. Nobody imagined that this abandoned child would one day create one of the most powerful armies Africa had ever seen. An army that would make rival kingdoms fear his name. A king whose battlefield strategies would shock his enemies and transform an entire region. His name was Shaka Zulu. But before he became the legendary warrior king, he was just a young boy fighting for survival. This is the untold story of how a rejected child became the African war king who changed history forever. The birth of a warrior. In the late 1700s, southern Africa was a world of powerful clans, competing kingdoms, and constant struggles for land and influence. Among these groups was a small clan known as the Zulu. They were not the strongest. They were not the largest. They were just one small community trying to survive. Around the year 1787, a child named Shaka was born. His father was Senzangakona, the leader of the Zulu clan. His mother was Nandi, a woman from another group. But from the beginning, Shaka's life was filled with challenges. Because of the circumstances surrounding his birth, many people refused to accept him. He was considered an outsider, a child without a true place in society. Instead of receiving respect, young Shaka experienced humiliation. Instead of growing up surrounded by power, he grew up surrounded by rejection. But those painful years created something inside him. A hunger, a determination, a desire to prove that he was not weak. Every insult became motivation. Every hardship became training. The world that rejected Shaka was unknowingly creating the man who would later dominate it. The child who learned survival. As Shaka grew older, life became even harder. He and his mother were eventually forced to leave the Zulu community. They moved between different territories, searching for safety and acceptance. During these years, Shaka learned one important lesson. In a dangerous world, the weak are forgotten. The young boy who once had no power began studying the people around him. He watched warriors. He studied their movements. He learned how leaders controlled their followers. While other young men dreamed of becoming respected warriors, Shaka was developing something different. A vision. He believed warriors could become more than fighters. They could become a disciplined force capable of changing history. But before he could build his own army, he needed to learn the secrets of war. And that opportunity came when he joined the military forces of the powerful Zulu Kingdom. The making of a military genius. Under the leadership of King Dingiswayo of the Zulu, Shaka entered the world of professional warfare. This was the moment everything changed. While many soldiers followed traditional methods, Shaka saw problems. He believed battles were not won by simply throwing weapons and hoping for victory. He believed victory belonged to those who were faster, stronger, and more disciplined. On the battlefield, Shaka was different. He was fearless. He moved closer to enemies instead of keeping distance. He studied every mistake. Every battle became a lesson. Every enemy became a teacher. Over time, people began noticing his talent. Shaka was not just another warrior. He was a strategist, a man who could see the battlefield like a chessboard. But his greatest ideas were still ahead. Soon he would completely change African warfare. The weapon that changed everything. Traditional warriors often used long throwing spears. They would attack from a distance and avoid close combat. Shaka believed this gave enemies too much chance to escape. So he created a new style of fighting. He introduced a shorter stabbing spear called the iklwa. This weapon forced warriors to move closer, to fight face to face, to depend on courage and discipline. Shaka also changed the way soldiers trained. His warriors practiced running long distances. They trained without shoes to make them stronger. They learned to move together as one powerful force. He created a military system where loyalty, discipline, and teamwork mattered more than individual glory. A group of ordinary fighters became something far more dangerous. A united army. And soon, the enemies of the Zulu would discover that they were facing something they had never seen before. The rise begins. When Shaka finally returned to the Zulu people, he was no longer the rejected child everyone once ignored. He was a trained warrior, a brilliant commander, a man with a dream. The small Zulu clan that once had little influence was about to become a powerful kingdom. But building an empire would not be easy. Shaka would have to defeat rivals, unite enemies, and create a force strong enough to challenge anyone who stood in his way. The world was about to witness the birth of a new power. The rise of the Zulu Empire had begun, and Shaka Zulu was ready to become the king history would never forget. The army that made Africa tremble. Powerful documentary voiceover script. The world had seen many kings, but very few leaders changed the future of an entire region through the power of their army. When Shaka Zulu returned to his homeland, he was no longer the rejected child who had been pushed away. He was now a warrior with a vision, a commander with a plan, and a man determined to turn a small, forgotten clan into a kingdom powerful enough to challenge anyone who stood in his path. But Shaka knew one thing. A king without a powerful army was only a man wearing a crown. So he began creating something the world had never seen before. An army built on discipline. An army built on loyalty. An army that would become one of the most feared forces in African history. This is the story of how Shaka Zulu built his unstoppable war machine. The small clan becomes a powerful force. When Shaka returned to the Zulu people, he found a small and divided community. The Zulu were not a great empire. They did not control vast territories. They did not have thousands of warriors. But Shaka saw potential. He believed greatness did not come from size. It came from organization, strategy, and leadership. After gaining power among the Zulu, Shaka immediately began transforming the way his people fought. He understood that old methods would not create a powerful kingdom. The future belonged to those who adapted. And Shaka was ready to create a new future. He gathered young warriors and began building a professional fighting force. But this was not an ordinary army. Shaka demanded complete dedication. Warriors were expected to train constantly. They had to obey commands instantly. Personal comfort was replaced with discipline. For Shaka, an army was not just a group of fighters. It was a single weapon controlled by one purpose: victory. Creating the legendary Zulu warriors. Shaka changed everything about the way his warriors prepared for battle. He believed that a soldier's body and mind had to be stronger than the enemy's. His warriors trained for speed and endurance. They marched long distances. They practiced fighting until their movements became automatic. They learned to operate as a unit instead of fighting only for personal glory. Shaka also changed the weapons they used. The traditional throwing spear was replaced by the shorter iklwa, designed for close combat. This forced warriors to attack with courage and confidence. There was no hiding, no standing far away. Victory required moving directly toward the enemy. Shaka created warriors who were not afraid of battle. They were trained to move forward when others would run backward. Soon, stories about the Zulu warriors spread across the region. People began hearing about soldiers who fought differently. Soldiers who moved like one body. Soldiers who seemed impossible to defeat. The battle strategy that shocked enemies. But Shaka's greatest weapon was not the spear. It was his mind. He understood that battles were won before the first attack. He created a military strategy that became known as the Horns of the Buffalo Formation. The strategy was simple but extremely powerful. The main force, called the chest, attacked the enemy directly and held them in place. The two side forces, called the horns, surrounded the enemy from both sides. Once trapped, the enemy had nowhere to escape. A reserve force, known as the loins, remained behind to attack exhausted opponents or support the main warriors. This strategy turned battles into carefully planned operations. Shaka was not fighting randomly. He was controlling the battlefield. Every movement had a purpose. Every warrior had a role. His enemies were not just defeated. They were completely overwhelmed. The Zulu army became known for speed, discipline, and terrifying efficiency. The birth of the Zulu Empire. With every victory, Shaka's influence grew. Small groups that once fought against each other began joining the Zulu Kingdom. Some joined because they respected Shaka's leadership. Others joined because they feared the power of his army. The small Zulu clan had transformed into a rising kingdom. Thousands of warriors now followed Shaka. His name became known across southern Africa. Enemies began changing their plans when they heard that the Zulu army was approaching. The sound of marching warriors became a symbol of fear. But building an empire came with a heavy price. Shaka's methods were powerful, but they were also harsh. His dream required absolute loyalty. There was no room for weakness. No room for rebellion. The same qualities that made Shaka successful also created fear among those closest to him. The king nobody could ignore. By the early 1820s, Shaka Zulu had become one of the most powerful leaders in southern Africa. He had transformed a small clan into a military kingdom. He had created an army that changed warfare. He had become a symbol of strength and ambition. But power always creates enemies. The more powerful Shaka became, the more people questioned his rule. Some admired him as a genius. Others feared him as a ruthless ruler. Behind the victories and the glory was a king surrounded by tension. The man who united thousands of warriors was beginning to face threats from within his own kingdom. And soon, the greatest challenge of Shaka's life would not come from an enemy army. It would come from those closest to him. Ending. Shaka Zulu had achieved what many thought was impossible. A rejected child had become a legendary king. A small clan had become a powerful kingdom. And an ordinary group of fighters had become one of history's most famous armies. But the story of Shaka Zulu was far from over. Because the greatest rulers are not only remembered for how they rise. They are remembered for how they fall. In the final chapter, we will discover the battles, betrayals, and tragic events that ended the life of Africa's greatest war king. The legend of Shaka Zulu was about to enter its darkest chapter.